There is something about Texas in the 1970s that breaks the heart in a way people do not expect. Not because it was bad, because it was so good, and because so much of what made it special is gone now. If someone lived through it, they carry those memories like something precious that slipped through their fingers. This was a time when Texas was becoming the Texas everyone would come to know. The oil boom was turning small towns into boom towns overnight. The Dallas Cowboys were becoming America's team. Houston was building the future with NASA and the Astrodome. Friday night football under those stadium lights was a religion that united entire communities. This was the decade that gave us Willie Nelson's outlaw country, Whataburger runs at midnight, and a way of life built on wide open spaces and neighbors who knew your name. The ranching families were still holding on. The small towns still had main streets that mattered, and there was a feeling that Texas was somehow both timeless and racing towards something bigger. But here's what breaks the heart. So much of that Texas is gone now. The family farms were sold off. The small towns hollowed out. The sense of community was replaced by sprawl and strip malls. For those who lived it, the 1970s in Texas were the last years of something that could never be rebuilt. Let's walk through what daily life actually felt like during that bittersweet decade. Some of this might bring back memories that ache. Some of it might explain why people who grew up in Texas then still miss it so deeply. Let's step into that world. Homes in Texas in the 1970s had that unmistakable look of the era. The harvest gold appliances in the kitchen, the burnt orange shag carpeting, the wood paneling that covered every wall in the den. But Texas homes had their own character too. The sprawling ranch-style houses with low roof lines designed to handle the brutal summer heat, the big backyards where kids could run, the carport instead of a garage because winter was rarely cold enough to matter. AIR conditioning had transformed Texas living. Without it, the state would have remained sparsely populated. By the 1970s, central air was standard in new construction. The hum of the air conditioner running constantly from May to October was the background sound of Texas life. Walking from the scorching heat outside into the cool interior of a home felt like stepping into a different world. The kitchen was where families gathered. Mothers made chicken fried steak and cream gravy, biscuits from scratch on Sunday mornings. Iced tea was brewed by the gallon and sat in a pitcher in the refrigerator at all times. Sweet tea so sugary it could make teeth ache. This was before anyone worried about such things. Texas homes often had a formal living room that nobody used, and a den where the actual living happened. The den had the television, the comfortable furniture, the recliner where father sat. Deer heads mounted on walls were common. Gun racks held rifles. This was Texas, and hunting was part of life. The backyard was an extension of the home. Barbecue pits made of brick where father spent Saturday afternoons cooking brisket low and slow. The smell of mesquite smoke drifting through neighborhoods. Kids running through sprinklers because the heat was relentless, and swimming pools were still luxuries for most families. What hurts to remember is how those neighborhoods felt. Everyone knew everyone. Doors were unlocked. Kids roamed freely from yard to yard. Neighbors borrowed cups of sugar and returned the favor with plates of cookies. There was a trust and a closeness that has faded. Those neighborhoods still exist physically, but something essential about them is gone. The car culture in Texas was intense even by American standards. Pickup trucks were everywhere. Not the luxury pickups of today, but working trucks with dents and scratches and toolboxes in the bed. These trucks were used for actual work, hauling hay, moving equipment, getting to the job site. The big American sedans ruled the roads. Chevrolet Impalas, Ford LTDs, Oldsmobile 98s. These cars were enormous with bench seats that could fit 3 people in front. No seat belts in the back. Kids lying across the back seat on long drives. AIR conditioning in cars was common by the 1970s, and in Texas, it was essential. The energy crisis of 1973 hit Texas differently than the rest of the country. Texas was oil country. The crisis brought pain at the pump, but it also brought money flooding into the state. Oil prices soaring meant Texas oil was worth more. The boom that followed would transform the state. But here is the heartbreak. That oil boom destroyed as much as it built. Small towns that had existed for generations were suddenly overwhelmed with roughnecks and wildcatters. The old families watched their quiet communities transform overnight. The money was good, but something was lost. The character of those towns, the pace of life, the sense of knowing who belonged, it was washed away in a tide of cash and chaos. Before we continue with the culture and community that made Texas special, if you are enjoying this look back at how people really lived and want to explore more decades and places, consider subscribing. There are so many more stories about how Americans built the life we know today. Friday night football in Texas was not just a game. It was the heartbeat of every town. The stadium lights came on as the sun set. The marching band played the fight song. The cheerleaders were in their uniforms. The stands were packed with everyone in town, from the mayor to the grocery store clerk. Those Friday nights brought communities together in ways that are hard to explain to anyone who did not experience them. The whole town showed up. Businesses closed early. Dinner was eaten quickly or skipped entirely. By 7:30 p.m., everyone was in those stands, cheering for their boys. The players were local kids. Everyone knew them, knew their families, knew their stories. When they scored, the whole town celebrated. When they lost, the whole town mourned. Rivalries between neighboring towns were intense and generational. Fathers and sons played against the same opponents decades apart. What breaks the heart is knowing that this still exists in Texas, but it is different now. The small towns have shrunk. The stadiums that once held the whole community now have empty sections. Some schools have consolidated. Some have closed. The Friday night lights still shine, but they shine over a Texas that has changed in ways that ache. The music coming out of Texas in the 1970s was defining country music for the nation. Austin was becoming the center of something new. Willie Nelson had come home from Nashville, grown his hair long, and started playing music his way. The outlaw country movement was born in Texas dance halls and honky-tonks. Willie's album Red-Headed Stranger, released in 1975, changed everything. It was sparse and storytelling, and unlike anything Nashville was producing. The Texas sound was rougher, more honest, less polished. It felt like the state itself. Waylon Jennings was part of that movement. So were Jerry Jeff Walker and Billy Joe Shaver. The Armadillo World Headquarters in Austin became the temple of this new sound. Hippies and rednecks mixed together, united by the music. It should not have worked, but it did. George Strait was still playing small venues in the late 1970s, not yet the legend he would become. Bob Wills' Western swing still echoed in dance halls across the state. The honky-tonks along the highways had live music every weekend. Dancing the two-step was something everyone knew how to do. What hurts is how corporate country music became. The Texas sound got smoothed over, packaged, sold. The dance halls closed one by one. The honky-tonks turned into chain restaurants. The music survived, but the scene that created it is mostly memory now. The ranching life that had defined Texas for over a century was fighting for survival in the 1970s. The old families who had worked the land for generations were facing pressures they had never imagined. Land prices were rising as cities sprawled outward. Property taxes were climbing. The economics of cattle ranching were getting harder every year. These families had built Texas. Their grandparents had arrived with nothing and carved out lives through sheer determination. The ranches had been handed down through generations, each one adding to what came before. The land was not just property, it was identity. It was family history written in fence lines and cattle brands. But the 1970s were when many families had to make impossible choices. Sell the land that had been in the family for a century, or watch it bankrupt them. Developers were offering prices that seemed impossible to refuse. One by one, the ranches fell. Drive through the hill country today, and what used to be working ranches is now subdivisions, golf courses, and vacation homes for people from somewhere else. The old ranch houses were torn down and replaced by mansions. The cattle were replaced by manicured lawns. Something essential about Texas died with each sale. The small towns that dotted Texas were still thriving in the 1970s. The courthouse square had shops that had been owned by the same families for generations. The hardware store owner knew everyone's name. The diner had the same waitress pouring coffee for 30 years. The pharmacy meant the pharmacist actually talked to customers about their health. These towns had rhythms. Saturday was for shopping and errands. Sunday was for church, and nearly everyone went. Wednesday night was church again for many families. The social life of the town revolved around the churches, the school, and the Friday night football games. Everyone knew everyone's business. This could be suffocating, but it also meant no one fell through the cracks. When someone was sick, meals appeared. When someone died, the community surrounded the family. There was a safety net woven of relationships, obligation, and genuine care. But Walmart was coming. The interstate highways were pulling traffic away from the old town centers. Young people were leaving for Houston and Dallas where the jobs were. The towns began their slow hollowing out. Main streets that had been the center of community life became rows of empty storefronts. Texas food in the 1970s was its own tradition. Barbecue was religion, and every region had its own style. Central Texas meant beef brisket smoked over post oak until it was tender enough to fall apart. East Texas meant pork ribs with a sweeter sauce. South Texas meant barbacoa cooked in pits underground. Mexican food was everyday eating in Texas, not the Tex-Mex that would be packaged and sold nationwide, but the real thing. Tacos from the little places that did not even have names. Enchiladas covered in chili gravy. Breakfast tacos that the rest of the country would not discover for decades. Chicken fried steak was the state dish in all but official designation. A piece of beef pounded thin, breaded, fried, and covered in cream gravy, served with mashed potatoes and green beans that had been cooked for hours with bacon. This was not health food. This was food that sustained people through hard physical labor. Whataburger was already a Texas institution. The distinctive orange and white striped buildings were open 24 hours. The burgers were served on big white buns. After Friday night football games, the parking lots would fill with teenagers. After Saturday nights out, families would stop on the way home. It was a gathering place. The heat of Texas summers in the 1970s shaped every aspect of life. From June through September, the temperatures would climb above 100 degrees and stay there. The air conditioning ran constantly. Electric bills soared. People moved slowly, drank water, and tried not to be outside between noon and 6 p.m. But there was something about those summers too. Thunderstorms would build in the afternoons, towering clouds that brought brief relief and the smell of rain on hot pavement. The evenings when the temperature finally dropped enough to sit outside. The lightning bugs that children chased with jars. Hurricane season brought anxiety to the coast. The 1970s saw several major storms hit Texas, including Hurricane Celia in 1970 that devastated Corpus Christi. When hurricanes approached, families boarded up windows and either evacuated or hunkered down. The community response afterward, neighbors helping neighbors clear debris and rebuild, was Texas at its best. Childhood in Texas in the 1970s had a freedom that seems impossible now. Kids left the house after breakfast and came home when the streetlights came on. They rode bikes everywhere without helmets. They played in creeks, built forts in empty lots, and roamed neighborhoods without supervision. Summer meant swimming in any water that could be found. Stock tanks on ranches, rivers and creeks, public pools where kids spent entire days, the deep tan that every Texas kid had by August, the chlorine smell that lingered in hair all summer. School started in late August, and the buildings were not always air-conditioned. Sitting in classrooms in the heat, watching the clock, waiting for the bell. The excitement when a norther would blow through in October and finally break the heat. That first cool morning felt like a gift. High school football players were heroes. They walked the halls in their jerseys on game days. They dated the cheerleaders. They represented the town's hopes on those Friday nights under the lights. What defined Texas in the 1970s was a way of life that was already under threat. The wide open spaces were filling in. The small towns were dying. The ranching families were selling out. The old Texas of cowboys and cattle and Friday night football was becoming something else. The decade saw Houston and Dallas exploding in population. Oil money transformed both cities into modern metropolises. The sprawl spread outward, swallowing farmland and ranch land alike. What had been countryside became subdivision after subdivision. For those who lived in Texas during the 1970s, there is a grief that never fully heals. Not for the decade itself, which was often wonderful, but for what was lost afterward. The sense of community, the connection to land and place, the neighbors who became family, the small towns that held people together. Texas is still Texas. The pride remains. The traditions continue in modified form. But something essential slipped away. The Texas of the 1970s was the last generation of a way of life that had existed for over a century. The kids who grew up then were the last to experience it fully. They remember the taste of their grandmother's chicken fried steak in a kitchen that no longer exists. They remember Friday nights in stadiums that have been torn down. They remember swimming in creeks that are now subdivision drainage ditches. They remember a Texas that lives now only in memory. That is what breaks the heart. Not that the 1970s ended, everything ends, but that the Texas of that era could not be preserved. The forces of change were too strong. The money was too good. The old ways could not compete with the new. For those with memories of that Texas, the loss is personal. Every ranch sold, every small town that died, every tradition that faded took something with it. What remains are the memories and the ache of knowing that their grandchildren will never understand what Texas once was. For those who carry these memories, there is always more history to explore.